Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. So we're into April and we've got loads of plants to be planting out, but also loads of seeds to be sowing. So this month is a crazy busy month for us gardeners. So I'm going to show you 10 things that I'm going to be sowing right now, and I'll also go into some of the things that I'm planting out as well. Let's do it. So we've got a crazy amount of sycamore seedlings this year because of last year's heat wave. There's an absolutely crazy amount of them. So just hold them off. But I'm going to plant my peas back here. I've cleared those sycamore seeds out. Let's just get a little furrow made. Those peas can go into there. There we go. If you give them the right shake, and they should just slide out. Brilliant. And they're into place. So get your soil in straight right back around them. Get your supports in straight away. Whenever you're planting things out, always make a rule of getting your supports in straight away, not to disturb the roots of established plants. So that's it, the whole thing's in. Job's a good one. Whenever you have things like this, empty gutters that you've just planted out from, make sure you're not leaving them to waste, planting them straight away. So the first seed on our list is we've just planted out our peas, and we're going to get peas planted again straight away. All those broad beans that we've been planting on and getting growing, these all need to be planted out. So we've got big healthy plants that we've overwintered and they're pretty much ready to flower. So as soon as we get these into the ground, we're going to be harvesting broad beans by the end of May time. You could even go for a late crop of broad beans and sow some now, and you'll get some planted. You'll get some harvested later on in the season. It won't be as good a harvest, but you'll still get something. So you've seen me be sowing carrots indoors now. Now it's the perfect time to start sowing outdoor carrots. Now this is my wheelbarrow that I grow a lot of carrots in every year, and always at this time of year it fills up with some random weeds, so we need to give this a good clear and refresh before we can start sowing in it again. So there's a couple of carrots that were actually left in. I don't know how good they're going to be, but we'll check them out. That's a nice surprise. Every year with this wheelbarrow I say it's going to be my last year, but we'll see. Yeah, one day. So I'm going to rejuvenate this bed with a little bit of freshish compost. It's got a little bit soggy just because it was out in the rain. There we go. Just mix it in. Because remember, carrots don't like a very nutritious soil. They want something that's quite bland. Yeah, that's a good way of describing it, that actually. Quite bland soil. Draw my lines. I'm going to try and stick to the lines. I never quite manage, but I'm going to try. And the kind of carrots that I'm going into here they're called Chantenay. So they're quite a pointy carrot. They're not the long carrots like that, but they're short, stubby, and a little bit pointy. So what we'll do is we'll just sprinkle a few seeds in these lines. We've got the carrots in, but we're not just going to settle at carrots. Because remember, carrots can be attacked by a lot of pests. Yes, carrot root fly are a very common pest for carrots. That's why I've gone for a high planter. But another added weapon in our defence is companion planting. Alongside my carrots, I'm going to plant one of my smelly plants. In we go with some spring onions. You don't need loads, so I'm going to sow about half my packet. And I'm going to sow them in a couple of seeds per drop. Now the idea is that the onions are going to grow long, they've got slightly shorter roots, and the carrots are going to grow deep, and they've got a lot longer root. And the smell of the carrots will be disguised by the smell of the onions. So hopefully we've done two things to prevent pests. We've raised it up, and then we've planted onions alongside the carrots, which is going to disguise the smell, which is going to prevent the carrot root fly from attacking and ruining our crop of carrots. Just cover those up. So in a couple of weeks' time, we're going to have carrot plants coming up. We're going to have our onion seeds coming up in about 3 weeks' time, and we're going to have a nice companion planted bed here. Lovely. So back to the bed that we sowed we planted our peas out into, and we're just going to hoe off some more of these sycamore seedlings. I mean, this year has been, I think it looks particularly bad. And you can see the amount of mulch I have on these beds. It's really thick, really deep mulch. So if you just pull your mulch back a bit like this, with all those sycamore seedlings in, it's just going to compost down. And then next week, once that's all died back, I'm just going to rake it back into the soil. Lovely. Create my little seed furrow. Because of the amount of mulch that I use on this, I don't need to add compost into these beds right now. So you can see all that mycorrhiza fungi in from the woody material that we use. And the seeds that we're going to go for into here are going to be beetroot. The thing I love about beetroot is the big, lovely, knobbly seeds. Easy to plant. So this is an ideal plant to sow with the kids. So you can get your spacings. And I'm not a fan of, with beetroot and generally root crops, I'm not a big fan of transplanting them. I know you can see some gardeners transplant them, but with beetroot and other root crops, I'm not a big fan of transplanting them in that way. So that's it. That's one row planted. Let's get another row in. So look at that. I've just created my next row, and while I've been digging my next row, I've covered up the previous row. So perfect. Now's the time for the rest of the seeds amongst the beetroot family to also be planted. So things like spinach, chard, all of these can be planted. You can go for direct sowings like this later on in the month. Give them a little bit of protection to get them off to a good start. If a cloche over the top, if you haven't got a cloche, a bit of plastic or even a bit of fleece. Otherwise, plant them in a seed tray in the greenhouse, and then you can transplant them later on in the month. This is a bed that I've not used for salads and stuff for a fairly long time, so it's a good time to come back to this. We've grown potatoes in here, we've grown squash in here, we've grown a lot of hungry feeding plants in here. So it's now time to give this bed a bit of a rest. But when I talk about giving it a rest, we're not going to just let it go fallow. We're going to put it to some work at the same time. Here I'm going to sow a patch of radishes. Now, you've seen me sow radishes indoors, and we've already had harvests of them. We've sown them in containers, and they're ready to be harvested very soon because of that residual heat. Now that the ground is starting to warm up, and the way to tell that the ground is warming up is that you'll see weed seeds germinating, and you'll see weeds coming alive. So all this being green, and they're giving seeds in plastic packets. Really clever. Okay. And these are a French breakfast radish. So they're not the globe radishes, they're not small, but they're not the really long daikon type radish either. They're a quite short radish. They grow to about 4 to 6 inches long maximum. A lot of people ask me that they struggle getting the radishes to actually ball up and form a tuber. Instead, they just get a load of leaves. Now, if you're getting loads of leaves, that's fine. You can use the radish leaves, but I'm sure you want the radish. That's why you're asking. What you want is, you don't want a very nutritious soil for radishes. If you go for a nitrogen-rich soil, what's going to happen is you're going to get loads and loads of leaves being produced, loads of green growth, and very little bottom growth. So if you do what I've done here, is I've gone for following a lot of intensive heavy feeding plants with some light feeding plants. So at the end of March I did a video about when to grow first early potatoes, and you can go and see that, but that's more focused on growing potatoes in containers. And now If you know the way I grow my potatoes into the ground. And this is my, wood chip potato bed that I've been preparing. So I better get this wood chip all stacked up and ready, because very soon I'm going to plant my potatoes into this ground. So now's the perfect time to be planting your first early and your second early potatoes, or as some people call them, determinate potatoes. And in a couple of weeks' time, it's going to be the time to get your main crop into the ground. So we're going to go for main crop into here very shortly. So this bed's ready for our main crop potatoes to go in about 2 weeks' time. At the moment, if you've got early potatoes, you can be planting those directly into containers and they'll be fine outside. But if you're going to plant into the ground, the only thing that I'd be wary of is just don't plant into soggy ground. Wait for the ground to dry up a little bit better. Let's get back into the greenhouse because there's lots of more things that we can plant in there. We've got rid of all our peas and beans. We moved them outside, so that's given us a bit of space to work on. See, this is the whole point. You don't just leave the garden, or you don't just leave the greenhouse to sit idle. It's constantly revolving. Move one thing out and another thing comes in to take its place. Always check the underside of pots and stuff for slugs. You see, the seeds that we're going to be sowing are going to be slightly bigger seeds, so we don't need the perfectly fine compost that I've sifted off really well. The slightly rougher compost will do just fine. Really, this is all homemade compost, and really homemade compost is the way to go. With the way manufacturers are treating us with the compost production at the minute, it's really, for me, it's really poor quality. It's just not good enough. There are some varieties that are okay, but you have to pay a premium for that. And even then, the quality is not as good as it used to be, because people are trying to rush through the supplies. They're not used to making good quality compost. They're rushing through the supplies because they're trying to compensate for the lack of peat. Yes, we want to move to peat free, but the manufacturers have got to give us a way of moving to peat free without affecting our growing. I've been peat free for nearly 15 years. Not everyone's got the space to make the amount of compost that I can make. So manufacturers have really got to step up the game. So we're getting on to squash time now. We sowed a lot of our bottle gourds during March, but during this month it's absolutely fine to sow your bottle gourds. It's a really good time for squash. So if you're going to sow things inside, then absolutely this is a great time to do it. And in these kind of pots, I'm going to sow multiple plants per pot because I want to save on space. Bismillah. So say a little blessing before we plant. So Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. For me, that's one of the reasons that we have a lot of good results here. So that's Muscat de Provence. There's a new one that I'm actually planting today, and it's called Guatemalan Blue Banana. Okay. Now, I've never grown these before, but they sound absolutely amazing. There you go, there's the seeds. So from the shape of the seeds and the style of the seed, you're not going to be able to tell it very much different to any other squash. And probably from the shape of the leaf, you're not going to be able to tell it from any other squash either. So it's going to be really important to label them properly. Crown Prince, this one is one that we always like, and this one's called Sweetmeat. See the colour of these seeds? They're slightly lighter. They've almost got a bluish hue to them. We grew Blue Hubbard a couple of years ago, and Blue Hubbard it's an absolutely huge plant. One thing I learnt was it's just a little bit too big for our garden. If we had an allotment with a lot more space or a big field, Blue Hubbard would be perfect. But yeah, it's just not good enough. It's just too big for our space. With all these, make sure you water them in properly. So I'm going to go for another first, actually, for me. And this, I'm going to go for melons. We've never really grown melons here before, but these are a cantaloupe. So 5 seeds should be absolutely perfect for us. Yeah, so we'll get those into the ground and we'll be away. There we go. And the last thing on my list is going to be one for later on this month. So we're going to go for planting sweet corn. So sweet corn, you know, end of April, early May, perfect time to get them into the ground. I mean, sweet corn used to be one of those plants that was a real nemesis for me. Trial and error, practice, 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 you get the hang of it. And we get some really good crops of sweet corn now. So there's 10 things that I'm planting right now. There are lots of other things that you can be planting. Cabbages, kohlrabi, all of those kind of things that I've covered lots and lots of times, pak choi. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe for regular updates. And if you want to support our channel, you could always become a patron. So I'll leave it there for this one. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.